Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this third day of the Scottish Learning Festival and to this session on skills progression in the broad general education in social studies in particular. I'm Lynn Robertson. I'm the Senior Education Officer for Social Studies at Education Scotland. I'd like to start off with an apology. The practitioner I'd hoped would be joining me and presenting with me today isn't able to attend this morning. However, I would like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Jim Fanning, who is very kindly going to monitor the chat for me and pop some links and things in during the presentation. So, Jim, thank you very much for doing that for me. There's a few protocols just to be aware of. Please be aware the session is being recorded. And if you wouldn't mind keeping your microphones off unless you're contributing. But if you are contributing, it would be lovely to see you. Please put your camera on. Presenting to a blank screen is not something that I'm used to at all. So it'd be lovely to see you and say hello. Please use the chat pane for your comments and your questions during the presentation. We'll have a couple of breaks just to have a chat about different aspects of what we're talking about. So there will be a chance to do that. But at any other time, if there's something you want to ask or something you'd like to comment on, please use the chat pane and use the emojis as well to agree and disagree with people that are putting questions and comments in. If you have any technical issues, please tell us using the chat pane. And please don't worry if you lose connection, just come back in following the joining instructions. There is someone on the call who can help with technical issues. It's not me, just to be clear, but there is someone with that expertise. So if you're having a problem, do let me know. Okie dokes. So, Education Scotland.
Hi, man.
Hello. Just checking everyone can see the slides.
Yep, slides are fine, Lynn.
Thanks, that's great. So Social Studies at Education Scotland looks at broad general education and at the senior phase. So at the broad general education, we have the three organisers: people, past, events and societies, people, place and environment, and people in society, economy and business. At the senior phase, social studies consists of around 13 subjects. I say around because things get added and things get taken away. But the classic ones you would expect: history, geography, modern studies, but also all the business studies subjects. So accountancy, accounts and business management, business administration, etc. Also includes economics, classics, travel and tourism, and studying Scotland. And within the social studies remit, I'm also responsible for political literacy, the study of Scotland, and global citizenship as it sits within Learning for Sustainability. Now, I hate to waste a captive audience, so just before we get started on looking at progression, I was hoping I might grab you for a few bits of news on the social studies front. There are two social studies teams, one secondary team and one primary team. And the codes are on the screen in front of you there, and I'm sure Jim will pop them in the chat for you as well. If you'd like to join, if you use the join with a code button on your team's page, just pop that in and you'll go straight through and become a member. I try to use it for updating information and also for some CLPL. So last week, the primary team's relatively new. We did our first piece of CLPL on the people of medieval Scotland last week with Glasgow University. And that session was to go through those resources. There is an upcoming session on the brand new Landscapes for Level 2 unit, which has been developed here at Education Scotland. It's available on Glow and it's also available on the files page of that Teams group. The Glow area for resources, Jim will pop the link to that in the chat for you as well. There are lots and lots of resources across the National Improvement Hub and across the resources area within social studies on Glow. So what I've done is I've created a wee double-page document which I've put on the Glow resources area. If you click into there, you can see the document and it tells you with links where all the different pieces of resource are. If you ever find there's something on Glow, or there's something you know that's on Glow that you can't access, you've got any problems, just email me and I'll do my best to get it to you. Worth highlighting a couple of partner resources to you just now. The Geographer Magazine is published quarterly by the Royal Scottish Geographical Society, and for every magazine I produce a learning guide with a set of teaching resources for that. Now, they would normally be housed on the Education Scotland website, but RSGS have got a lovely web developer who creates beautiful pictures and makes my very boring Word documents look wonderful. So they are housed on the RSGS website, but they're produced by myself at Education Scotland. So feel free to go and have a look at those. The other thing I'd like to mention to you this morning is the very recently hot off the press, just produced Census 2022 resources. Census 2022 are at the SLF exhibition, so if you've not had a chance to go along and have a look at the new resources, please take the time to do that, and I'm sure they'd be very happy to chat with you in the exhibition. I think there might be someone here from Census, so I couldn't find the link for the new resources. If you have the link, it'd be great if you could pop it in the chat. But they are filmed. They've been done by they're like newscasts with a professional newsreader, and they have lots of interviews with children and young people. So they're really interesting and lively resources to help young people engage with Census. So that's my bit at the beginning, just to not miss you if you're interested in social studies resources, which I hope you are since you're here. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do, and I know that it's probably 8 minutes past 8 on a Thursday morning, but there's a Jamboard that I'd like you to have a wee look at, if you wouldn't mind. The link is in the chat. Jim's going to post that for you. It should be completely open, so you shouldn't have to sign in or do anything to get onto the Jamboard. But what I'd like to, since we're here to talk about progression, what I'd like you to do is to give me an idea, and you can put as many on as you like, of topic, social studies topic you teach, the year group you teach it in, and what assessment type you use. Now, if you've not used Jamboard before, when it comes up, it's like putting a post-it note on a wall. So if you go to the toolbar down the left-hand side, the fourth icon down, it's like a little square with the corner cut off. Click on that, and a little square will appear on the screen. You can write in the square. If you really want to be fancy, you can change the colour of it, so you can have a yellow post-it or a blue post-it, or just like you would on a normal Jamboard, on a normal post-it note that you can put on the wall. So as many as you like, if you wouldn't mind just now. Topic, year group and assessment type, and pop that into the Jamboard. And what I'll do is I'll leave these Jamboards live for a couple of days after the presentation. So if you'd like to take a photograph of them, I'll try and organise them so that you can see all the post-its. I'll take a photograph of them. You feel free to take a photograph and have a look at what everyone's put up. And I'll also put a little summary on the social studies resources page on Glow. So I'm going to nip out my presentation just now so that I can have a little look at the Jamboards. I'm hoping. Now, the good thing about this Jamboard is they're completely anonymous. So today we seem to be coming in as animals. So I've just seen anonymous lemur. There's a badger there, and I'm fairly sure there's a camel. So you click onto the little post-it note, and you might put S1 Amazon and save, and then that appears as a sticky note, and you can move that sticky note around the screen. So if you could add to the Jamboard just now, that would be great. Seeing lots of people joined the Jamboard, but if you're having problems and you can't get onto it, then feel free to put your comments in the chat. That would be the other way.
Lynn, I think the Jamboard seems to be asking for a Google account.
Sorry, there's lots of people signed into. There's about 24 people accessing just now. Which is very strange.
I think maybe you're right. It's best maybe to put comments into the chat.
Pop them in the chat then. Give us an idea of what you're doing. Sorry, folks, that's very disappointing. I hate when that happens because it tells you that it's completely free and accessible to anyone on the web, and then it doesn't do that. So my apologies. While you're doing that, could you have a wee think? And please put your hand up or unmute yourself to come in. Are there any topics that you find more difficult to assess in social studies than others? Or are there any that you think particular assessments work really well with particular topics? Please just come in and say hello and tell us a bit about some assessment types you use for particular topics.
While they're doing that, Lynn, just to note that Pauline's put the link into the Census 2022.
Fantastic. Thanks, Pauline. That's great. Thank you. Gosh, you're all very quiet. It's like asking a second year class on a Friday afternoon a question. Everyone who was talking 2 minutes ago clams up. I
think it's the early morning, Lynn. I think unless you've maybe got used to a bit of a later start.
I think so. Okay, folks, in that case, if we will not ask you to talk too much, I'll move on and work through some of the things I wanted to go through with you this morning. But yeah, it's good to think about the different assessment types we've got at different stages throughout the social studies work. So whenever I talk about progress in social studies, I like to remind us of the moderation cycle, sometimes called the learning, teaching and assessment cycle as well. There are lots of little circles on this moderation cycle, and if you go to the Moderation Hub, you can access training CLPL on all of these different circles. But they are generally based on literacy and on numeracy. So a wee while ago, I took all of the resources and I've social studiedized them. Not that I think that's a proper word. So you can use them if you're asked by your head teacher to look at, for example, success criteria. Then the materials on the Social Studies Glow site on each of the circles are specifically social studies versions of what's on the main Moderation Hub. So it's got social studies E's and O's, learning intentions, success criteria, etc. So it gives you that opportunity to look at that. For planning our learning, teaching and assessment, it's really important that we continue to use the E's and O's. Someone said to me a wee while ago, now that the E's and O's have gone and been replaced by the benchmarks, just to be clear, they've not. The E's and O's are the documents that we should be using for planning our learning, teaching and assessment. The benchmarks document for social studies, though, is a one-stop shop. So down the left-hand side, you have the E's and O's, and down the right-hand side, you have the benchmarks. They don't run parallel to each other. You have to put spaces in the benchmarks to make them match up to the E's and O's. I won't go into the reasons for that, but they are all there. One of the things I think that's really important to remember, because we're talking about learners having an entitlement to experience all the E's and O's up to the end of level 3, is that if we're not bundling, we're going to really struggle to get all of those E's and O's within our curriculum before the end of S3. And also, really importantly, when we're planning, we need to plan learning, teaching and assessment at the same time. And I say this because when I started teaching in 1992, yes, I know I'm giving my age away here, when we planned a new unit, we planned the work that we wanted to do with the resources we had, and then we looked at the assessment, rather than thinking about what is it we want our learners to learn, and then planning the learning and teaching along with that. So I'm aware that it's important that we're doing all three at the same time, and that we're moderating with each other and making sure that we are clear on the standards that we've got. A balance between ongoing and periodic assessment is really important, so that, I mean, a summative test is fine, but maybe not all the time. But it's great to use different kinds of assessment to enable different learners to have the best opportunity to use that. The benchmarks documents are available on the National Improvement Hub, and they were designed to provide a clarity on national standards to make it easier for people to look at a national standard across the country. They are based directly on the outcomes within the E's and O's, which means that if there wasn't an outcome, then there isn't a benchmark. There is a clear line of progression from early through to fourth, but they still have the gaps that the social studies E's and O's have got, and I'll come back to that later on. And they were designed to provide a bit of support with consistency and professional judgments. I'm not spending much time on the benchmarks, but just a reminder that the benchmarks were to help assess when learners were making progress towards a level and achieving a level. We were also told that they should be used for making sure that students were being presented at the correct levels, and also to report locally on what children's level was to themselves and their parents, and to be discussed across the school and across schools to achieve a national standard. Now, the benchmarks, after their publication and conversations with practitioners, made me aware that they were not as helpful in supporting progress within a level at social studies. And they still have the gaps. Social studies E's and O's have this odd situation where you can have an E and O early in first, it disappears at second, and oh, look at that, it reappears in third and fourth, or indeed any combination of that. So that presents us with certain issues when it comes to progression, because a thread of skills and context just doesn't appear all of a sudden, just disappears. And also, there were concerns about showing progress. And I was invited to South Lanarkshire by an associate assessor who has a history background about 3 years ago, just after the publication of the benchmarks, because they felt that the social studies, children in social studies were not progressing or not be able to show their progress as well as they were doing in other subjects. And it appeared to show that children were not doing as well in social studies. And this was a really interesting conversation that I had with them. So we started talking about how we can show progression. And the main thing that became really clear to me after speaking to lots of people was that assessing by content alone in social studies is a really difficult thing to do to show progression. Because of the breadth of possible contexts and content in social studies, if primary, secondary relationships are good and people are planning their courses together, it's unlikely that children will repeat content. They may study the Vikings in P5, they'll never study the Vikings again until perhaps they choose to do an assignment or a project, but they may never repeat content. So if assessment is solely on the recall of content facts, then it's really difficult to be sure of progress. And it's also difficult to give learners their next steps. Now, I'm going to take an example here of when I was PT Geography, and we decided to overhaul our second year course and we did it thematically. So we decided to do the USA, Italy, Japan, Brazil, and Arctic Canada. So we did it by country. I think probably of all the courses I've ever taught, it's the course I most enjoyed teaching to young people. And it was one of those, there was lots of really good videos around for the different courses because the BBC produced them, and we had an opportunity to do some really good work. But it was very different. So in Italy, we were looking at volcanoes and Mediterranean climate. In Japan, we were looking at earthquakes and transport systems. In Brazil, we were looking at the Amazon, mega cities and informal settlements. And in Arctic Canada, we were looking at the tundra and the life and the changing lifestyles of the Inuit. And in the USA, we were looking at deserts and something else. And I have to confess, it's been a while, I can't remember the other one. But if we're only assessing knowledge in there, how do we show improvement? How do we give next steps? Is the next step, you know, when you've done the USA, when you do Italy, learn more stuff? So that becomes really difficult to say what the learner's next steps are. I'm not suggesting that we don't assess content. We know that our national qualifications for social studies are very, very content heavy. So young people will be expected to give information that they have learned about case studies, give detailed information in their national qualifications. So it's really important that we teach them how to learn. They absolutely have to do that. But in terms of their progress within the broad general education, we need to think about the skills that they're learning. Now, this is not going to work again because I was going to give you another Jamboard, but Jim, if you wouldn't mind monitoring the chat for a minute or two, I'm going to ask you to do a wee brain dump. What are the social studies skills? What comes to mind when you think about social studies skills? And if you just pop them in the chat just now, what skills occur to you when you think about social studies?
Lynn, whilst folks are doing that, just to say there were
Yep.
some good responses in the chat, you know, to the earlier Jamboard session.
Great.
So, for example, Rowan talked about S1, Stone Age, and the use of posters. Shona, Earth Forces, Volcanoes and Earthquakes assessed using mind mapping. Mrs. McGee, S2, Scottish Wars of Independence, using a newspaper article. Mrs. Muirhead, S1, what is a business? Used multiple choice and a research task. Rowan, Inequalities, S2, using a test. Titanic, using role play. That's an interesting one. Mrs. McNaught, P7, Natural Disasters, a green screen disaster report. That's being techie, green screen, seems very good. S1, this is from Ms. Wallace, S1, Children's Rights, Health and Equalities, done in partnership with English, I think, according to that. So, yeah, just to say, lots of good feedback. The chat was actually slow earlier, which is why I didn't feedback to you, but I'll keep an eye on what people are putting in now. Thanks, Jim. That's great. It's really interesting to hear different kinds of assessment. The People of Medieval Scotland CLPL last week, there was an author and drama teacher. She was on and she was talking about resources for drama for people of medieval Scotland, actually, and talking about how you could teach people of medieval Scotland through drama and then assess it. So there's lots of amazing possibilities. People are very inventive with their assessment. Jim, have we got skills coming up there? Yeah, so we've got from Rowan, evaluation, comparison, from Ms. Weir, describe, explain, analyse, justify, evaluate, conclude, compare. Shona Park, explaining. Mrs. Muirhead, literacy, numeracy, analysing and evaluation. Linda Swanson, describing, explaining, analysing, identifying bias, drawing conclusions, justifying a decision. You want any more, Lynn? Or no, that's gosh, that's brilliant. Thank you. That's really good. Excellent. Yeah. Yep.
when we think about the reason I asked folks to do that, and I really appreciate you putting them in, is that when you go back to the documentation, so I'm going to click to my next slide. I took this from the Principles and Practice document for social studies, which is still available on the Education Scotland website. And one of the issues when you amalgamate 4 subject areas, if you like, within social studies, so history, geography, modern studies and business studies, is that you end up with a really large number of slides, sorry, a lot of slides, but a really large number of skills. And what got me about this was it said, children and young people, as they learn with social studies, will develop a range of skills, including, so that's not a definitive list, it's a really big number of skills. But one of the things that came across when I was speaking to the folks down in South Lanarkshire was that they were saying that they were concerned that social studies tended to look as if it was lower order skills that children were learning. And the thing is, from this, it's absolutely clear that that's not the case, that there is the opportunity for young people to be learning skills right across from basic observing and describing and recording through to discussion and informed debate, justifying points of view. But there's lots of different skills within that document there. So, having spoken to the people at South Lanarkshire and having spoken to quite a number of other people, I decided to try and create a skills progression framework for social studies. There were some schools that were telling me they were really quite far ahead in it and were very kind and invited me out to have a look at what they'd done. But lots of people were saying actually that's something that would save us having to do it if one could be provided even as a template for you to have a go with. So I brought together the Social Studies National Network, which has representatives from local authorities. We try to get as many local authorities to participate as possible. There's also representatives from Initial Teacher Education, from the 4 associations, SAGIT, SATH, MSA and the Business Studies Association. And I brought them together, and in the days when you could have a cup of tea and a cake together in Denham House in Livingston, split them into groups, and we spent the afternoon trying to create or trying to look at how we would look at skills progression. And what we actually ended up with was 4 completely different documents at the end of the afternoon. So I took those away and tried to amalgamate them into one document. And the issue for us was, do we create a document that has 3 separate sections? So it's one for people past and people past events and societies. Apologies for my mistake in the slide. One for people, place and environment, one for people, society, economy and business, or do we create one document that covers all of the organisers? So having had a go at the 2 different versions, I almost drove myself mad highlighting skills on the E's and O's document. One day I took it back to the team and said, here's one document with the skills under the 3 different organisers. I then went out on a wider consultation, and I must admit I did that mainly through the Facebook groups online, and ended up with lots of email track changes and suggestions for the document, which was really helpful. There was then a Teams meeting to review a final document before any final changes were made. So the decision was to create one document, but with the organisers organised under the 3 different headings. Some of the skills are common across the 3. For example, describe is common across the 3 organisers, but even within describe, it's not the same description. However, what we did was we decided, someone had made the point, there is some single teacher delivery out there, and obviously in primary, people teach by topic very often, where they'll include the 3 different social studies within that. So where possible, where the skills are the same, they're in the same order. So describe is the skill that's the first one for each of the organisers. So I'm going to take you in to have a wee look at some examples. That's the link for the skills framework. It's on the National Improvement Hub. If you search Social Studies Progression Framework, you'll get it, no bother. But don't forget, and I'm kind of pushing this point, that we need to assess knowledge alongside our skills. And it's about creating assessments that can do the job of assessing both skills and knowledge. So here's a wee example of people, past events and societies. So the very first skill there is describes. Now, one of the advantages we had with this was that there are no gaps. So although the E's and O's have gaps, we decided that this would not have gaps in it. So there is progression from early through to fourth for all of the skills that we produced, and we were very lucky to have some very experienced primary and early years practitioners who contributed to those early and first skills. That was particularly useful, I think, to provide that context from early years right the way through. We were bounded a little bit because as Education Scotland, you'll not be surprised to know that I can't issue anything that contradicts the E's and O's and the benchmarks. So one of the problems we had, for example, looking at describes there in front of you, the last thing we wanted to do was to say, provides one description, provides two descriptions, provides three descriptions, because we knew that that doesn't show any ability in improving your skill of describing. All it does is say you can repeat that skill more often. But one of the things we found in the E's and O's, when we looked at them in detail about skills, was that was a little bit of the approach. So we had to be very careful in our language, not to contradict the E's and O's, but to try to find ways to supplement the E's and O's to make that easier to assess the skills in that way. I'll go over to the next one. The other thing we kind of wanted to do was to try and make it the same. So if I flip back, first level there for history, people, past events and societies can provide at least two simple descriptions. So what we wanted to do was to make people, past events and societies the same as people, place and environment, the same as people in society, economy and business, but we couldn't because the E's and O's don't do that. So you'll see when you look here, second level for people, place and environment requires three more detailed descriptions. The reason for that is the E's and O's say three. So we were bounded by that. We couldn't contradict the E's and O's. So we had to try and find ways of making it work. And that was one of the reasons why they had to be the three separate organisers, because if we didn't have the three separate organisers, then it was very difficult to make the E's and O's work within them. So you can see, for example, I've put gathers information there because it fits really well for people, place and environment, using an instrument to find out some geographical information. So that might be using a thermometer, for example, at early years, and looking at the weather, where we're moving up to using two instruments to collect information and draw a simple conclusion, and getting up in level 4 to using at least 4 instruments or techniques to collect a range of data and drawing conclusions. People in society, economy and business, there's an example of this one. And there was lots, I have to mention Gordon Black in particular from the Modern Studies Society. He was incredibly helpful with the Modern Studies work. He'd already started to think about skills in this way. And one of the things we took was that idea of, with Modern Studies, it's about the familiar to the unknown. So looking at simple descriptions of something that you are very familiar with, moving on to looking at sources in the wider society. And again, gathering information there, coming from gathering information at home or in your learning area through to using your sources from wider society. Really important that it's absolutely clear when you've had a look at these documents that it is for guidance only. So this social studies progression framework was not designed to replace your already good practice. And I've written that in red on the document, because the last thing I want is for you to feel as if, well, you know, Education Scotland have produced this, we have to use it. Absolutely not. This has been produced as a guide, as a template, as a help, as a starter, or indeed as something you can take and use in its entirety, but it's entirely up to you. So if you find it helpful, that's great. If it doesn't work for you because you've already got something in place, then that's already absolutely fine as well. It should help to ensure that there's a wide range of evidence for your learners, and particularly in terms of demonstrating that breadth, challenge and application. Because if you're learning a skill and you're then applying it in a different context, and that's precisely what this original statement was designed to have. And one of the things that's it's been very interesting, a number of schools have come to me recently and said they're looking at the idea of allowing children to choose their own assessment, maybe twice a year. So rather than dictating that you'll all do a poster or you'll all do presentation, once or twice a year, giving young people the opportunity to decide what kind of assessment they would like to do. It doesn't work when you ask them all the time, because you know what it's like. Some children will prefer a particular medium and it doesn't challenge them to try it in a different way, to use their skills in a different way. But it's a really interesting idea in terms of looking at assessment. Also enables that providing feedback to learners in terms of success criteria. And it helps them, I think, to identify, if they know what the skills are that they're learning, it helps them to identify their next steps and to start to collect information about what progress they are making themselves. Please remember that social studies, although it's not collected for the National Improvement Framework, social studies grades should still be provided, levels should still be provided for young people for their own learning, but also for their parents. And I always like to try and remind people of that when we're talking about progression. So, common theme, I think, in all of this is talking, and we do have a few minutes left. Hopefully your tea has wet your whistle, as it were, and please feel free to put your hand up or to unmute yourself and come in and have a chat. I will stop presenting so that I can come in and see you all. My email address, lynn.robertson@educationscotland.gov.scot, or just email Education Scotland Inquiries and you put social studies and you will get to me if you need to contact me. But I'll come out of this just now and stop sharing my screen so that I can see you all. Are there any questions or anything you'd like to ask, or any comments you'd like to make at all before we finish? We've got about 5 minutes.
Lynn, I thought I would just highlight something that Ms. Weir put into the chat earlier, and it just reflects on something you talked about, and it's the range of assessment opportunities. So Ms. Weir, talked about assessment posters, PowerPoint presentation, etc., and made the point that students very often choose how they present their knowledge. Yep,
I think that's a really interesting thing. It's certainly not something I did when I was teaching, but it's something that's come up increasingly often to me and in recent times, and something people are definitely doing.
I also wondered, Lynn, to what extent colleagues use the kind of teacher networks and professional learning communities to share their approaches, because, as I say, just looking through some of the earlier examples, and I know I'm going to harp on about the Titanic again, but I just think I just wondered whether some of those approaches in terms of role play, etc., how colleagues might have taken the opportunity to share those approaches with other colleagues.
One of the great things I think is for secondary certainly is that you've got the SAGIT MSc and the Business Studies Association, where there's the opportunity to have conversations and work together and things. But I'm always very aware that primary is difficult, more difficult for us to reach and really more difficult for me to have conversation with primary teachers, which would be fantastic. If you've got an interest in social studies, please contact me. I'd be absolutely delighted to chat with you, and please join the primary team.
And again, in the chat, then Ms. Wallace has just made the point that she uses Saget and Local Authority Forum and also Twitter, social media to share. Tintops, we don't share enough. Focus tends to be on literacy and numeracy. I'm going to suggest this at our LC though. So
great. And really delighted to see an ASN school here again. Something that I was when I was in North Lanarkshire after I finished my DHT post. I did some support within North Lanarkshire and worked in the ASN section, and absolutely delighted if there's anything I can do to help. You're a neglected section when it comes to social studies sometimes, so please get in touch if there's anything at all I can do to help you. Now, folks, I'm not going to keep you away. I know you've probably got classes to get to, etc. So please, I shan't make you hang on. Have a lovely day. This is very early in the morning, I think, to be doing this kind of session. So thank you so much for turning up, and have an absolutely brilliant day, and keep in touch.